All right, so we're now recording. Hello, welcome everyone. I see some familiar faces, which is awesome. And also some that I don't know, which is great too. To start, I wanted to just, just wanted to thank Sharon and Earth Hand Gleaners for giving me the opportunity to work with them. It's interesting that I'm working on a project about connecting to the garden afar when that's been my primary relationship with it since I heard about it about a year ago. And so I'm really excited that I have the opportunity now to be inside the garden and work with all of you guys. And really that's what I'm most excited about, is working with the Earth Hand community. And that I wanted to start off on that note by introducing myself, but also the way that I see my role working on this project and with Earth Hand Gleaners. And that is best described by the quote by Margaret Kovach, MI, in her essay for Emerging from the Margins, Indigenous Methodologies. And she asks, especially to white academics, this is directed, but I've taken it in my life, in my artistic practice, am I making space or am I taking up space? And so I start off here because as I go through the project, there is going to be a lot turned on what I've seen and observed in the gardens, and how I'm hoping that my experience with coding and my artistic practice can kind of just shine a mirror on what's already there. I also do have a very strong, I should say, footnoting kind of practice. I like to mention a lot of people throughout the talk whose work has definitely influenced my own. I will be sharing a page that has the links to all the people I have referenced, because a lot of them are tech critics, writers who talk and whose themes touch on technology or artistic practices involve computation. And in no way expect anyone to know these people, but they're really great, and they're where the individuals who kind of led me to what I see technology being able to do. And so I want to reference their works throughout the piece, and we'll link that at the end to an Arena channel. Quickly jumping back to the Mr. Rogers, I thought that it is a great way to introduce a project because he is asking these ideas of the metaphor of a garden. And this project, A Digital Garden, is looking at the both physical ideas of a garden, but also the metaphorical ideas of nurturing something and being able to enjoy the work of kind of communal care. And who doesn't love Mr. Rogers? So over the past month or so, I've been quietly and not so quietly getting to know the means of production garden, and have begun to map it. You know, this work, a lot of it has been kind of just trying to get up the learning curve of everything that means of production has to offer, and in no way, shape, or form have even come close to fully understanding it. And that's, you know, again, why I'm really excited to be talking to you guys today. So I came to make a digital resource for the Earth Hand community to use to communicate on the gardens, their maintenance, and the plants inside them, especially in as a result of COVID and social distancing measures, as the opportunities for in-person discussions are somewhat in flux, and kind of in a constant back and forth of possible and not possible. Having some other space to communicate on, Sharon kind of pointed to and suggested. And technology and the language of it has always been really rooted in a lot of metaphor, whether that's our desktop being this metaphor of an office space, or people saying surfing the web as a way of describing the internet as water, and us as a person kind of navigating our way through it. Metaphor and simile are really rooted in that, and that is how the term digital garden came to be, is looking at the relationship between how ecology and computation can find commonalities in the way to describe both. And with that, I wanted to start off with some key terms that I'll be using a lot through the talk, and as we all have probably a stronger grasp on garden terminology, when it comes to computation, I thought it would be good to start off with just some agreed upon definitions. The first is network. And so at its most kind of broad definition, it's a group of people or things that share a way of transmitting information or communicating to one another. I think when we all think of network now, we do think of things like the social network. We think of social media. We might even go so far as to think of this Zoom call. But there also, networking has been done for forever, and you can trace it back further to catalogs and print media, and even further, it's just ways in which a group of people can communicate with one another. A repository, you might think of it as a water repository, is where my mind went first. But when it comes to a digital sense, it is a place where data or information is stored. So just a vessel that contains physical information. Then open source. This is the one term that was coined in the computer science biz, as you will, and it was used by software engineers originally, and legally was a term for when copyright holders allow for others to use their intellectual property with no strings attached. But it's really kind of come into our vernacular language as just this idea of sharing resources. The last one might seem a bit silly to bring up, but the definition of a garden. It is the word that we're going to be using a lot, both literally and metaphorically. And so, the definition that I think of a garden as is this place where things, plants, grow and are nurtured and are on display. And a garden can be both public or private. It can be for one person or for many people. So the idea of looking at the relationships between the linguistics of the environment and how we describe the environment, and computational linguistics has been a well discussed topic for a lot of time. And one such example is in Data Healing's talks and videos. They share how they see the internet as water and social media as the mushroom or mycelium network. When the internet actually was first being created, it was described as a mycelium network. Again, when we're trying to describe these things that are so theoretical, they come back to things that we do know. And a lot of the time, that was the environment. It has also been used and documented through Donna Haraway's writings in the Cyborg Manifesto, and as well as Nima Gurthry's writings on taking back the internet. Both of these writers are feminist and feminist writers and critics, theorists whose work has come into discussing the internet and technology as it is this space that is so discussed now. So those are some of the places where I am inspired by and bring my gain my inspiration from. And so what is a digital garden, as we've been leading up to this term now for so long? A digital garden is like a physical garden. It provides beauty and resources. The word garden is used to express the visual experience of a collection of plants, but also a metaphor for a space that grows through communal care. So breaking that down, physical gardens and digital gardens have a lot of similarities in the verbs we use to describe them. They are both nourished. They are both tended to, and they are both walked through. But while a physical garden is nourished through sunlight and soil, a digital garden is nourished through a growing repository of information. While a physical garden has pathways to walk on, a digital garden is navigated through filters or through links that take you to other pages. But what these two, a physical garden and a digital garden, have in common is that they are both open source ecology growing a material garden, a material library. And this holds true at least for the means production garden, which, as you know, grows materials for the community to use, as does a digital garden provide resources for individuals to gain information on plant species and their uses in Vancouver. So that was a pretty theoretical definition, though, of what a digital garden can be. And so I wanted to show some examples of some interpretations of what a digital garden is, at least in my opinion. And so the first I wanted to start off with was perhaps the most literal of my examples. It is called the Cloud Point Garden. And let me know if you have trouble seeing my screen, because I know I'm switching views. And so the Cloud Point Garden was created by Clement Valla, and it uses the technology of Cloud Point, which is generally used in architecture for mapping spaces. But rather than mapping large sites for infrastructure, or the insides of houses. Valley used it to map different gardens for the public to view. So how does this fit into the definition of a digital garden? Well, we are enjoying visuals that celebrate greenery and celebrate nature or gardens, and you can navigate it. I am right now moving my cursor up and down, and I am able to get different views. How is it giving us information? Well, it's showing us spatially an area that this would have a scale, and you could actually comprehend an entire space off of this website. And it's grown through a series of through a 3D scatter point graph, which was created using the technology of CloudPoint. Going back, the memory garden is an example of another group of artists. Remember the collective BUFU, By Us For Us, based in New York. This is a recent project, and it is set to be released later in the year, I believe, at the end of the summer. And the way that the collective describes their project is it's a collective for collective mourning for those lost to state violence due to COVID and due to continued systems that harm Black people, Indigenous people, Brown people, low-income people, trans people, undocumented people, and marginalized people. And the website is set up so that each person who visits can input the name of someone they have lost, want to remember, and mourn, as well as a memory. And each name is then given a unique digital flower, which then gets planted in their digital garden. The intention being that once all these names are collected, there can be some way of them bringing this digital garden into a real life place. So looking at an example from Montreal, if anyone can recognize some of the streets, Queering the Map was a project created by Lucas Larochelle, and the way he describes his project is that it is a collaborative map where the users can input their own personal queer experiences and pin them to a particular place in Montreal. And each of the pegs has the story connected to it. There's been over 80,000 submissions in over 23 languages. So it's quite an expansive project. How is this a digital garden? As it might be a little bit less clear than the other two examples shown so far. I count it as a digital garden because it is relative to a particular place. It is definitely created through communal care and a ever-growing repository of information is nurturing the growth of this garden of experience. And you can wander through it by clicking at all of the different stories and moving and navigating with your mouse over a map of Montreal. So lastly, I wanted to bring it back to Vancouver as we start to discuss our own digital garden with the acoustic ecology that was really pioneered here at Simon Fraser University in the 1970s. And so this was a project that was done in 1973 and entitled the Vancouver Soundscapes, where they originally were looking at noise pollution, but began to really focus on recording the sounds of Vancouver. And they created a series of 10 tracks. They then went on to make Soundscapes of Canada in 1975, and really influenced the sound art sphere of art. And here shown is, I don't believe it was for the Vancouver project, but it's a map that shows the recordings in 1974 at Westminster Abbey Monastery Mission. And this is a accompanying photo of the same recording. While this isn't digital, it for the time was new media, and new media that was looking at its relationship to nature. And another interesting way of considering how a garden doesn't have to be visuals, but it can be sound, it can be text, it can be video. It still fits in with our definition of a digital garden, which is celebrating the beauty of a green space, and also created through a large set of data, which in this case was all sound. And I have just a quick clip so you can hear a bit of it, which we won't play for long. I'll also, in the final link that I'll send out after this, with all of the things I referenced, there'll be this sound clip as well, if you're interested in listening further. And Simon Fraser University also has some information on the projects. So an interesting tidbit that I wanted to start off talking about our digital garden with was when I was first starting to read up on means of production garden. I came across the means of production website where it described the original intentions of the project. And in it, it was described as the desire was to create an open source landscape. The project being done in 2002, it was directly drawing on computational speak to describe something natural. And I think it's a really beautiful moment that now, almost 20 years later, we have gone full circle and are now trying to use metaphors of the environment to describe a digital space. So to begin, as I said before, digital garden is this metaphor that we are using to describe a digital space or a website could be another way of putting it, that holds the information of means of production garden, as well as information on what the plant's holding can do. But to build anything, we need a blueprint. And I see our blueprint or our map as a weaving. And I see it as a weaving because there's a lot of direct relationship between the history of computation and the history of weaving. And again, it's a really great, interesting way in which the work of Earthhand falls into the work of computation. And in the bottom right-hand corner, I have Beryl Karat's work, where she, in the 1970s, I believe 1974 or 3, the information got cut off on my slide, so I can't quite read it. Maybe if I go full screen, no. Where she described how one of the first computers and interfaces was the Jacquard loom, using weaving cards in the very large machine. And this relationship between women's work and computation are really directly tied. And the way that a lot of beginner HTML is taught is by showing you how to make a table and then fill that table with information. And what you get at the end is something that looks very much like something you would get on a loom when you first learn how to do a plain weave. For anyone who is a weaver here. And I see our map a bit as a weaving of our website, in part due to my coding ability, but also because there is this really great connection, again, between the language that we can use to describe a weaving that we're all comfortable with, and the language we use to describe this digital space, which is right now this very big unknown. So behind the image of Karat's work is the beginning of my map of means of production garden. You might be able to recognize in the top right corner the palomas and the arches, and the bottom there's a little bit of the shed showing. And as we have been in the gardens, I've been attempting to start to understand what that weaving will look like. And I have been, Sharon and I have been kind of asking ourselves questions. And when relating them to the metaphor of a garden, they come down to the questions of what do we feed our digital garden, what do we harvest, and how do we walk through the garden? These terms, these questions are open-ended. They haven't been fully defined by us, but I am going to go into them briefly to help try to paint the picture more of what our digital space will look like, what our digital garden will look like. So a few of these questions, what do we want to feed it? You can see some of the photos that we have been slowly accumulating. You can see a lot of the fiber works that we have been adding, not shown on the screen. We also have drawings and dye samples and pigment samples. We know that we want to show the plants, we want a map. We know that inside of discussing the uses of plants, we want 4 main pathways and 4 ways to navigate the garden, the digital garden, and that is fiber plants, natural color plants you can get natural color and pigments from, food and medicine plants, and of course the woodworking plants or trees and such. So jumping back to this photo here, you can see that right now it is a bit of a Mod Podge of everything. That is my desktop screen when I opened up all the photos and videos that we took after yesterday's walk through the garden. And that's somewhere that I wanted to start to note that we've started to accumulate all this information, but we still have a really long way to go. We're halfway done kind of the introductory workshops on creating the map of the garden, filling in what this will look like, but we still have quite a ways to go. And I wanted to take the last 15 or 20 or so minutes to have a bit of a Q&A, as well as just a dialogue on what others would see our digital garden having in it, and what you hope to be able to harvest from it, or information you hope to find on it. So I will, I think my roommate just got home, so I'm just gonna quietly ask them. But I also wanted to invite everyone to unmute themselves as kind of we discuss a few things. And 1 minute.
I'm just going to jump in and say I love these metaphors that Sarah is throwing out, and it occurs to me that this is our opportunity where we're planting the garden, essentially what we get to do now. And it's been really kind of fun for me to jump in and have this as an excuse to be bringing objects from my closet and my home out and from the studio to document them in the garden has been quite fun. And you know, here we are, here's our opportunity to plant the digital garden, and what do we want it to include? And I'm really hoping it's going to have a whole lot more in it other than just things I've made. So please jump in and share your ideas and your makings and your offerings and your knowledge with what we've got going on here. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
So it will just include the means of production garden. We're not talking about Trillium and.
Not yet. Initially, Sarah and I were absolutely talking means of production and Trillium, and that's still the big pie in the sky notion, is that we'll do both gardens, but we realized we needed to start with one. And means of production is, you know, is the bigger, chewier of the two gardens, I think, to take on. And recognizing that time is a limited thing, we may only do means of production at this point and come back to Trillium later. Eventually we do want to do Trillium as well, but we're just going to focus on means of production for now and see where that gets us. And just at this point, I'll mention as well, I'm giving Sarah a very small stipend as a part of what I've been paying other artists as honoraria for some of our online content. So Sarah's getting a very small stipend from Earthhand for getting this project started, but I think one of the key factors on whether we get to Trillium or not is going to depend on whether her Canada Council grant comes through. If the Canada Council grant comes through, then that's going to buy her essentially more time and energy to commit to the project. So fingers crossed for us on that one, please.
I'm also going to stop the sharing if that's all right.
Yeah, that's great.
It's still recording, but that way we can all see each other a bit more clearly.
Have people got questions or thoughts that come up for them immediately that might be good starting places?
Yeah.
Can I go?
Yeah.
MOP also had a lot of garbage and waste, and that I remember from previous things, and the local, the big show that you did. You talked. You had a big the tent, the nettle tent that you spoke about with all the garbage and the waste of the homeless people leaving it there. Are you going to also include that, Sarah, in the digital map?
I think that's a great question to also pose to everyone here, and also maybe through kind of our talks is, digital space, it's this kind of world building that we're doing, and it's really important to consider, what is included in it, and the cleanup aspect of means of production. I can see that being an important part of the garden and its maintenance. And as people would use this as a resource, understanding their responsibility, and also caution when they are starting, maintenance work in the garden, to be aware of those factors as well, and have a place of discussion could be important. I also turn it to others who work in the garden, and if they see a digital garden having those aspects, or if they see it as more a catalog of the things that Earth Hand Gleaners grows.
I'm just going to interject on that one. First off, the garden has been amazingly, I'm going to knock on wood now, but it's been incredible this year compared to past years. It's been quite a different scene. If we were to include the trash and the debris that we pick up and that level of it, I would almost want to see it as something that is separate from the digital garden, and maybe becomes something that is more, we're all looking at these graphs on a daily basis now with the numbers for coronavirus and where those are at, and the numbers of cases and deaths. And I would more see the garbage as being something that is more kind of like stats and graph, where there's like a rise and a fall that just kind of becomes this bizarre piece of data that shows if there is any rise on weekends, or spring versus fall, or any of those kinds of variables. That would be kind of an interesting thing that maybe lays over top of the garden, or is kind of like a bottom sidebar, but I don't see it being kind of mapped and tracked and given as much, or given the same space as the plants themselves. I think it should be something that's separate, but I really like that as a question. You've got me thinking now, Z.
Yes, that would make sense for sure.
I think too, what Sharon, from a comment on your comment, was that it's sort of like the background noise of it's the background noise of other people's, and it's not always trash, but it's other people's interaction with the space. And it's not our our idea of making things and cultivating the space, but it is an interaction. And so it's like the background noise, like if what we're planting is people's creations, then it's the background noise of all the other interactions that's happening there. But like a sidebar, or like maybe something that like overlays, and you can kind of see this sort of graph of it going up and down for different days, or connected to different things that people are posting on certain days that are time marked. And then you can also see like how much trash there was in the garden if you like click something else. I don't know.
David and I have taken to ranking our visits when we go. So every time we go to the garden for any workshop, either gardens, we always have this like kind of, we hold our breath and we're like, okay, are you ready? Like, what's going to await us? Is it going to be beautiful? Is it going to be hellish? We never know. And so now we kind of have this kind of tracking system where, depending on the amount of debris we find, as well as the amount of beauty we see that others have done, or these lovely little random things that happen, we have this kind of like plus or minus scorecard, so that we just kind of like rank the visit as we're kind of, very informally make up the rules of how we're ranking as we go. But, it's kind of like, you know, how was your service today kind of questionnaire that some, you know, that companies would ask you at the end of your interaction. Was this, you know,
Well,
anyway.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's why I asked, because it's such a big part of the gardens too.
Yeah.
But another question, I was also thinking, I mean, with the digital garden, you know, mentioning the fibers and the natural colors and all that, and everyone, all of us artists who use it and members who use it. Another aspect would be all of us take everything we learn with Earth Hand Gleaners and everything we've learned at MOP through the Fibers Guild and the Dyers Guild, you know, we've all taken it outside and we're all doing something with it. Most of us are actually, especially there's a strong core group of members, and I'm definitely using a lot of everything I've learned at Earth Hand Gleaners and either teaching it to the home learners or, you know, passing on the knowledge. Is that something as well? Like, or is that also considered, you know, like Nicholas said, background kind of noise?
And I think that
it's so important. That's all. It seems
Yeah.
so important. Maybe it's just me, but it's affected everything I've done in my life the last 4 years that I've known Earth Hand Gleaners. It's, you know, and it's plays in everything I do. I've changed every way I look at every forest, every garden I go to. I look at every invasive plant, and I can't look at any plant without thinking about its uses or saving it from the garbage or green waste. And that's because of MOP.
I totally agree. I mean, even after actually the first session with Sharon a week ago on weaving plants, my roommate has a yucca plant, and I kept looking at it being like, do you know this is like a needle and thread in here? And I can't not look at it without being like, the possibilities are endless. So I totally can relate to what you're saying. And I think that's kind of drew on something I wanted to also note, which is when it comes to what's included and what's not, that's up to really the information that people kind of provide me with. I'm a fly on the wall, really, and you know, and also so new to this space that's been around for so long, that I come more, as I said, as like a mirror, and I also come with the maybe one pro of being the outsider is that you know, possibly things that just seem so mundane, you know, I am definitely pulling those in because I'm like, this is amazing, but it's just so mundane maybe to people that to people who spend a lot of time in the garden that they go more unnoticed. But I see my role more as pointing out the obvious and as a collector of information than a decider of what comes in. And so at the end of the day, if there's not a lot of information on a particular topic, it won't be necessarily, and it's kind of one of these things that everyone says, we can put on the back burner, then that's kind of how it'll be put on the back burner. But if it's something you're interested in, that's the exact type of stuff that I'd love to start having conversations with people about. And then it's asking, you know, how does that information get shared, I think is then the really important conversation to have with everyone, which is, while kind of as I suggested, it's going to be this weaving. So it's going to have a very grid-based system to it. You know, that can be photographs, that can be videos, that can be sound clips, that can be drawings, that can be text. But at the end of the day, I kind of am, I'm open to the medium that people feel comfortable most with. Something I did think though, when it came to knowledge sharing, was it'd be great if it, for the most part, paired with the plants that were in means of production. And that's more for the fact that we're trying to create kind of an archive of the gardens.
Sarah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
First, that was lovely to see or to listen to the theoretical framework that you're bringing to this project. And I'm just wondering about how time, like seasons and maybe even years are going to be represented in the garden in relation to plants and harvesting. if you've thought about that or have ideas about that.
One thing Sharon had brought up with me was the idea of filters. And so that's what I've been sort of thinking about right now. And the idea of how can we have all the plants that get harvested in fall, if you click, be shown at the same time or together. And how do all the weaving plants get shown together? So we've considered that. When it comes to how, I've been really falling into organizing my own notes in like an old school like library catalog sense, where you kind of have titles and then you have keywords, and it's kind of searchable that way. That is one way I am considering bringing is this idea that each kind of plant has almost like a little library search card with it. When it comes to years, that's something I haven't considered much yet. I have been coming into this secretly in the back pocket. I don't think Sharon knows this one yet, which is that I want to code it. My coding is great. It sounds great as if no one has ever coded in their life. They think I can code really well. If you've taken about a year of computer science, you've totally maxed me out on my literacy. And I'll be completely honest with that. I use coding for artistic practices, and as a result, I learn what I need, and I only need what I want. So there's interesting holes in my knowledge, but I think what's great about that is that it's going to be coded in a way that an amateur can come into it and input new things. And so when it comes to ideas of years, I'm not sure, but when it comes to updating, gardens change, beds get moved and switched around. Because it's going to be coded in such a way that it's really just grid-based, you'll be able to swap one thing out for another fairly effortlessly with little coding knowledge. But I'm opening up to if anyone has ideas on like some idea of yearly, like of showing years.
Well, I honestly, I feel like it's again like a garden when you are looking at a piece of land that you can just do anything with. It's overwhelming at anything, the everything. How do we have the everything? And you can't have the everything. Mm-hmm. So there's that need to both curate the space as you would in a garden and make selective decisions of what are the purposes we're serving and what is going to aesthetically be the most pleasing, and all those questions that we ask ourselves of how we lay out the footpaths and where we are doing the plantings at MOP still hold true in this, which is fantastic. And I'm really looking at it very much as being a snapshot in the here and now of the garden that becomes a kind of a historical receptacle, if you will, that kind of is an archive of what the garden looks like now, what's in the garden now, as well as kind of threads to the history of the garden that has led to some of those plants being there. A couple of things I want to just add in that have really triggered for me on this has been fantastic. Z, your comment about what people have learned, I feel like something that I could do, and I would love a couple of people helping on, Z, I'm looking at you for this since you spurred the idea. The idea of having the earth hand pollination as kind of a piece somehow that fits in this of where the earth hand community has learned from the garden and what has kind of been pollinated out as kind of one of the things. This is a beautiful opportunity to capture. And I feel like we could sit down and come up with some kind of a survey that could go out to our members to fill in. And if we just kind of are very specific in what questions we're asking so that we know we're going to get answers that are going to fit into the format we're wanting. And so the first thing that comes to mind is like breaking down a survey so that there are various sections for the food and medicine, for the fiber plants, for the dye, for the woodworking. So we're kind of working with those filters we've already established. And then within that, we could even be listing the plants and creating an opportunity for people to provide specific material like, oh, the matter in the dye bed, this is what I learned and this is where I taught it or took that knowledge, so that those pieces kind of fit in there, and we kind of are just generating some content.
Just triggered me as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Speak not only us people, us artists taking, you know, our knowledge out of Earth Hand Gleaners and spreading it, but you've also been spreading the plants. I
Yes.
just realized that.
Yes.
Some of us have, you know, those madder plants safely growing in our gardens, and those indigo
Seeds.
plants, just
Yep.
so they survive.
Yep. So there's been lots of seeds that have been shared. There's been lots of knowledge that's been shared. And that was one of the things when I did the daylily, talking about the daylily at means of production. And I didn't really have any object to bring other than like a scat of rope. And I stopped and I thought about it for a minute. I thought, you know, it's really a lowball number to say that there have been over 1,000 people that we've taught to make rope in the Lower Mainland with daylily from that garden bed. Like there's over 1,000 easily. If I, you know, 2018 when Land and Sea was on, we probably taught 1,000 people that year alone with the rope that was coming out. So yeah, those are kind of interesting pieces that are a part of how we see the garden and think about the garden and the importance of it. Yeah, look at you with your... So, and then the other piece to that, we were commenting about a seasonal harvest screen that will be kind of layered on as a moment. I think another one that fits with that becomes the counterpart would have to be the stewardship work. So that you're looking at like, here's the bounty that's coming out, but here's, you know, like there's input, there's output, like any system. It's this reciprocity that would need to be kind of layered. And I recognize like we're going to run out of time here. There's only so much that we can capture in something that has started off as a very small pilot project for Sarah to keep her busy through the pandemic while she waits to go back to school in the fall. And honestly, the way this is kind of shaping as I'm seeing it now, it could be like a full-time job for Sarah for the next year if the time and the budget was there for it. So at a certain point, it's going to be a case of like everything else Earth Hand does, we're going to call it a pilot project, Digital Garden, where we're starting the notion of thinking about what a digital garden might be, and we're planting those first seeds, and it goes from there. And you know, maybe this is something, Sarah, that we just kind of are returning to you with you again to kind of keep going. We'll see what grows. Great. Are there other questions before we? I think we're just till 8:15, weren't we? So we're technically into overtime now, and I want to be respectful of people's plans for the rest of their evening. But before we sign off, are there other thoughts or questions that have triggered for people? You're welcome as well, of course, to send things along afterwards. earthhandmapping@gmail.com is Sarah's email for this project. So please send Sarah photos, writings, musings, drawings, anything that kind of feels akin to the project. If you can specifically give her content that it relates to fiber or the dye bed or woodworking, if there's something directional like that that helps her know where to slot it, that's also really helpful. Any other questions for Sarah?
By woodworking, do you mean David's part in that?
Yes, yeah. So David's part in it, but also like, you know, even the button making that we've done, or also I'm just really interested in acknowledging some of the other species of native shrubs that we've got in the nettle zone that we don't necessarily even work with at this point, but we've got some really beautiful plants in there that have all kinds of uses that we're not directly tapping into yet. But yeah, so woodworking will be that general. Yeah.
And are you looking for stuff to send Sarah? It can be stuff from past years, or are we looking from a now to present? Okay.
No, past years is great. Yeah.
Cool.
That's it. Questions? Sarah, thank you so much. It's just, yeah, it's really exciting. It's something completely outside of my realm of what I know or understand, honestly. I love that I find it so cute that you think, oh, simple coding. And I'm just like, some days I struggle to get my computer on. So, you know, truly. Anyway.
You know what, though? I am really the same way. I honestly am the same way. It took me, I am not a good Zoomer, I guess you would say, by any means. Yeah, I feel more akin to what's going on in the garden than I actually do sometimes the work I do on my computer that I seem to be like literate in. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. And for those of you like Christy that I know don't live here